biker gang confronts The Rock at a gas station. What happens next leaves them speechless. It was late at night when The Rock pulled into a quiet gas station, filling up his truck and minding his own business. The sound of revving engines shattered the silence as a group of bikers rolled in, their motorcycles growling like thunder. They parked in a tight circle near the pumps, their leather jackets decorated with patches that hinted at a tough reputation. One of the bikers, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, eyeing The Rock with a smirk. "Well, well, look who we have here," he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to suggest trouble. The rest of the gang exchanged glances, their postures shifting as they waited for what would come next. The Rock turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He didn't flinch, didn't react, just met the biker's gaze with a calm intensity. The air felt heavy as the others gathered around, a subtle challenge in their stance. "You think being famous makes you untouchable?" another biker sneered, crossing his arms. "You're big, sure, but out here, size don't mean much." The Rock didn't respond right away. He simply looked at them, his body language relaxed yet firm. A few gas station customers had stopped to watch, sensing the tension. Someone pulled out a phone, ready to record what they thought would be an explosive confrontation. But The Rock didn't take the bait. Instead of anger or arrogance, he let out a low chuckle. "You guys got a problem with me," he said, his voice steady. "Or are you just looking for a story to tell?" His response caught them off guard. The smirk on the leader's face twitched, and for the first time the gang hesitated. They had expected him to get defensive, maybe even escalate the situation, but he wasn't playing by their rules. The leader squared his shoulders, still holding his ground. "Maybe we just don't like Hollywood types thinking they're better than the rest of us." The Rock nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Then, without breaking eye contact, he took a step forward. "That what you really think?" The gang didn't answer right away. The confrontation had started one way, but now it was shifting into something entirely different. The gang exchanged quick glances, their confidence wavering for just a second. The Rock wasn't backing down, but he also wasn't giving them the reaction they had expected. He stood there, arms relaxed at his sides, watching them with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to be forced. One of the younger bikers, shifting uncomfortably, finally spoke. "People like you don't get it," he muttered. "You come from money. You got lucky. Guys like us, we don't get those chances." The Rock's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is that what you think?" His tone wasn't mocking, just genuinely curious. The leader scoffed. "Don't act like you know struggle. You ever wonder what it's like to be born into nothing, to fight for every scrap? You ever been counted out before you even got a shot?" A slow, knowing smile crossed The Rock's face. He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that the words carried weight. "Every single day." The gang went silent. The leader frowned, but something in his expression shifted. "You know where I come from?" The Rock continued. "I was evicted from my home at 14. Had $7 to my name when I started. Nobody handed me anything. I had to fight for it. I had to earn it." A few of the bikers exchanged looks. This wasn't the Hollywood story they had imagined. The Rock exhaled, glancing at their jackets, their patches, the way they stood together. "You guys ride together, right? That means something to you?" The leader nodded slowly, his posture less aggressive now. "It's a brotherhood." The Rock nodded. "Then you already know what it means to have people count on you. You know what it's like to push through when it's tough. So tell me, why'd you walk in here looking for a fight?" The leader hesitated, his jaw tightening. The younger biker beside him looked away, shifting on his feet. It was clear this had started as something more than just ego. There was something underneath, something they hadn't said yet. The Rock waited, his patience unwavering. He had seen this kind of pain before, the kind that masked itself as anger. He knew there was more to this than just a group of guys testing him, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what it was. The leader let out a slow breath, his eyes shifting to the pavement. The rest of the gang stayed quiet, waiting, as if even they weren't sure what he'd say next. For a moment, the gas station felt like a different place entirely. Less like a standoff, more like something deeper unfolding. The leader finally looked up, his expression less hardened now. "We had a guy," he said, his voice lower, rougher. "One of our own. He looked up to you." The Rock stayed silent, listening. "He wanted to turn his life around," the leader continued. "Used to talk about it all the time, how you went from nothing to something. Said if you could do it, maybe he could too." The younger biker who had spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably. His jaw tightened, and he looked down. The Rock already knew what was coming before the leader even said it. He didn't make it. A heavy silence settled between them. The leader didn't give details, and the Rock didn't ask. He didn't need to. He had seen loss before, felt it in his own bones. It was the kind of weight you carried with you, the kind that never really went away. The leader rubbed the back of his neck, his tough exterior cracking just slightly. "We tried to be there for him, but sometimes that ain't enough." The Rock nodded, understanding more than they realized. He had been in dark places before, had faced moments where the weight of everything felt unbearable. "I'm sorry," he said. And it wasn't just something to say, it was real. The younger biker finally spoke again, his voice quiet. "He always said he wished he could meet you, that it would have meant something." The Rock exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. "What was his name?" The leader hesitated, then muttered, "Tyler." The Rock let the name settle in the air before speaking again. "Then, let's make sure his name isn't forgotten." The gang stood there, processing what had just happened. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about grief, about the unspoken things men like them didn't always know how to say. And now, in the middle of a gas station parking lot, they were finally saying it. The Rock let the weight of Tyler's name sit between them, letting the moment breathe. No one spoke. The gang, once standing tall with their usual air of dominance, now seemed different. Less like men trying to prove something and more like a group carrying something heavy. The loss of one of their own had left a hole they didn't know how to fill. The leader finally cleared his throat, shaking his head. He kept saying he was going to turn things around, get out of trouble, start fresh. But life doesn't always give second chances. The Rock met his eyes. "Sometimes you have to make your own." The younger biker let out a rough exhale, rubbing the back of his neck. "He was trying," he admitted. "We saw it. He just didn't think he was good enough." The Rock's jaw tightened. He had heard those words before. He had felt them before. That creeping doubt, that whisper in your own head, telling you that no matter how hard you try, it'll never be enough. He had battled that same feeling in his own life, and he knew how dangerous it could be. He was good enough, the Rock said, his voice firm. He just didn't have enough people reminding him of that. The leader looked down, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. It was the kind of anger that didn't have a place to go, the kind of frustration that turned inward because there was no one to blame. The Rock stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so they had to really listen. "You said you're a brotherhood, right?" The leader lifted his chin. "Yeah." "Then be that," the Rock said. "Not just when it's easy, not just when you're on the road. Be that when it matters. When someone's on the edge, when someone's drowning, that's when they need you the most." The gang stood there, unmoving, letting his words settle. The leader exhaled slowly, nodding once. "We tried," he admitted. "I know," the Rock said. "And now you keep trying, for each other." The air between them had shifted. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It wasn't even just about Tyler. It was about making sure they didn't lose another brother the same way. The leader ran a hand over his face, his shoulders visibly heavy under the weight of everything unsaid. The others stayed quiet, their tough exteriors still intact, but their eyes told a different story. This wasn't the conversation they had expected to have tonight. The younger biker let out a slow breath. "We should have done more," he muttered, almost to himself. The Rock looked at him, then at the rest of the group. "Maybe," he said honestly, "maybe you could have, but guilt doesn't change the past. What you do now, that's what matters." The leader finally nodded, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling a little slower now. He glanced around at his crew, reading their faces, seeing the same unspoken emotions in their eyes. They had all been carrying this, all feeling the same weight, but no one had dared say it out loud until now. The Rock folded his arms, studying them. "You know how I got through the worst moments of my life?" he asked. The gang waited, watching him closely. "I had people," he said. "Not a lot, but enough. People who didn't let me disappear, who reminded me who I was when I forgot." He exhaled slowly, his voice steady. "You want to honor Tyler? Don't let another one of your brothers go through what he did. Be the reason someone doesn't give up." The younger biker swallowed hard, nodding slightly. The leader didn't speak, but his grip tightened on the chain hanging from his belt. They were hearing him, really hearing him. After a long pause, the Rock took a step back, glancing at their bikes. "You guys still ride for him?" The leader nodded. "Every damn day." The Rock gave a small nod of approval. "Good." A few seconds of silence passed before the leader cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders. "Didn't expect this conversation," he admitted. The Rock smirked. "Neither did I." The tension that had been there before, the unspoken challenge, the edge of confrontation, had completely faded. This wasn't about testing strength anymore. It was about something much deeper. And in that quiet moment, standing under the dim gas station lights, it was clear. Tyler wasn't forgotten. And now, because of this conversation, neither was the lesson his life had left behind. The leader looked down for a moment, then slowly nodded. There was no more anger in his expression, no more weight of proving something. The rest of the gang stood still, their tough postures softened just slightly. This wasn't how they had imagined the night going, but something about it felt right. The Rock took a slow breath, glancing at them one last time before turning toward his truck. He didn't need to say anything else. He had said what mattered. As he reached for the door handle, the leader suddenly spoke again. "Hey, Rock." He turned back, one eyebrow raised. The leader pulled something from his pocket, stepping forward. It was a small metal pin, worn, scratched, but carefully held. "This was Tyler's," he said, extending his hand. He always kept it on his jacket, said it reminded him to keep pushing forward. The Rock studied it for a second before taking it, feeling the cool metal in his palm. He didn't know Tyler, never met him, but in this moment it felt like he had. He closed his fingers around the pin and nodded. "I'll hold on to it," he said, his voice quieter now, "and I'll remember him." The leader gave a sharp nod, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. The younger biker, who had been silent for most of the night, finally stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thanks," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. The Rock smiled slightly. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just make sure you look out for each other." The group nodded. Then, in a way only bikers could, they gave him a silent show of respect. One by one, they climbed onto their bikes, the roar of the engines cutting through the stillness. As they pulled out of the gas station, the leader was the last to leave. He gave the Rock one final look, not as a challenge, not as a threat, but as something else entirely, a quiet understanding. Then he revved his engine and disappeared into the night with his crew. The Rock stood there for a few seconds, the small pin still pressed against his palm. He opened his hand, looking at it, before tucking it safely into his pocket. This night could have gone 100 different ways, but this way, this was the one that mattered. As the Rock watched the taillights of the motorcycles fade into the distance, he exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. What started as a confrontation had turned into something completely different, something real, a reminder that behind every tough face, behind every challenge, there's often a story no one sees. Sometimes people don't need a fight, they need a conversation, and maybe that's the lesson we should all take from this. Strength isn't just about standing your ground, it's about knowing when to listen, when to understand, and when to show someone that they're not alone. So the next time you find yourself in a moment where you can choose between conflict and connection, ask yourself, what will actually make a difference? Because the strongest people in the world aren't the ones who fight just to win. They're the ones who fight for something bigger than themselves. Tyler wasn't forgotten that night. And maybe, after reading this, someone in your life won't be forgotten either. Be the person who listens. Be the person who stands up for others. Because sometimes that's all it takes to change a life.